The shrill chime of Chris's phone at 3:17 a.m. sliced through the hush of night like a scalpel, jerking him out of a heavy sleep. Disoriented, socked damp from the water glass he'd just knocked over. He groped for his phone. The screen glowed with two ominous words. County Jail. His stomach churned. He answered, and a mechanical voice followed. You have a collect call from the county detention center. Do you accept the charges? A beat passed before Chris's trembling finger confirmed yes. Then her voice came, cracked and strangely hollow. Chris, it's me. You need to bail me out. Now. Jill sounded detached, even annoyed. No apology. No remorse. Just demand. What happened? He asked, sitting upright. Jeans half on. I don't want to talk about it. Just come. Her tone didn't match the woman he'd married. A woman who once wore guilt on her sleeve for even minor missteps. Now, she was clinical. Defensive. She claimed it was just 2 drinks, but Chris wasn't buying it. Something in her voice was off. Wrong. The kicker? When she slid into the car at the jail. He caught it. The unmistakable scent of someone else's cologne lingering on her blouse. Not his. Not hers. Someone else's. The weeks following Jill's arrest were like watching a crack quietly spiderweb across glass. Silent, slow, but undeniably spreading. Chris tried to push down the unease gnawing at his gut. But it grew with every new inconsistency. Jill's wardrobe shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Sleek, branded handbags with tags still attached. Perfume that lingered like a question. Heels that hadn't left the closet in years. She said it was all retail therapy, that the DUI had rattled her. But the changes weren't just external. The distance between them thickened like fog. She laughed at her phone a little too often, turned the screen downward as if the notifications were sacred. When Chris made casual comments, who's Beth again? Or did Angela get rehired? Jill blinked, delayed, as though rehearsing the answer before offering it up. She claimed to be busy, overloaded at work. It came home freshly made up and glowing in ways that didn't feel earned by overtime. Their Friday night dinners evaporated into convenient excuses. Then, the real gut punch. Chris followed her one night, only to find himself parked across from a boutique hotel, staring at her car, tucked away like a secret. She never showed up at the bar she said she was heading to. That night, as she slid into bed and turned her phone face down once again, Chris stared at the ceiling, no longer in denial. Something wasn't just wrong, it was unraveling, and the thread, taut and glinting, had Jill's name written all over it. Chris never imagined himself transforming into a silent investigator in his own home. But once suspicion took root, it grew like ivy, slow, persistent, and impossible to ignore. The morning after he caught Jill in a lie about her office schedule, he began quietly collecting facts. Not dramatic confrontations, just quiet, calculated observation. He checked their joint bank statements first. What he found wasn't explosive, but it was enough. Strange purchases at boutique hotels, charges from obscure restaurants he'd never been to, and sudden withdrawals labeled vaguely as cash. He started keeping a log, each line neatly time-stamped, each discrepancy noted. Then came the unintentional jackpot. While cleaning the living room, he remembered the old family tablet stashed in a drawer. Dusty, slow, nearly obsolete, but synced to Jill's iMessage account months ago. And like a wound ripped open, everything spilled out. Hundreds of texts between Jill and someone saved under the bland name Eddie. Sweet nothings, explicit fantasies, careful coordination of rendezvous disguised as business dinners. The worst? Jill's giddy message the night of her DUI. Dinner was perfect. Your lips tasted like wine and sin. Chris stared at that message for a full minute. Numb. That night, Jill had told him she'd had 2 glasses with her coworkers. Now, the memory was rewired. She wasn't just reckless. She was euphoric in betrayal. His heartbeat thudded slow and deliberate. This wasn't insecurity. This was truth. Devastating, undeniable truth. And Chris knew what had to come next. Evidence, confrontation, and the end of illusion. The moment Chris walked into the boutique hotel's parking lot and spotted Jill's car tucked discreetly behind a delivery van, something primal shifted inside him. It wasn't just anger, it was a deep, hollow ache wrapped in betrayal. He didn't storm into the lobby or demand answers. Instead, he sat across the street in a fast food lot, watching, waiting, letting the slow burn of realization set in like an ember lodge beneath his ribs. Jill had lied, again. Claimed she was working overtime. Claimed the office needed her. But here she was. Heels likely kicked off somewhere inside a dimly lit room. tangled in sheets that weren't theirs. Chris didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just watched the night swallow the truth, quiet and calculated. When he returned home, the bourbon burned down his throat like cleansing fire. The next day, he started building the case. Digital breadcrumbs Jill hadn't bothered to cover. Find My iPhone betrayed her locations. Credit card statements unraveled her fiction. Every lie she spoke had a receipt, and Chris kept each one, organizing them into folders like evidence for a trial. He didn't tell her. Not yet. He just let her continue weaving her stories, smiling as if she still owned his trust. But behind that calm, Chris had become someone else entirely, focused, ruthless, and no longer willing to play the fool. Every lie she whispered gave him another brick for the wall he was building, not to protect himself, but to bury the last pieces of their so-called love. Chris didn't plan to become a digital sleuth, but heartbreak has a way of sharpening instincts and teaching you skills you never wanted to learn. After finding Jill's car parked at that boutique hotel, a switch flipped in him, cold, methodical, relentless. He stopped listening to her excuses and started tracking facts. She claimed she was working late, but her location pinged near neighborhoods she never had reason to be in. She told him she was out with coworkers. Yet her bank statements painted a different story. Meals for two at restaurants miles away from her office, boutique hotel charges masked under vague vendor names. And then came the key discovery. An old family tablet, long forgotten in a drawer, still synced to her iMessages. What he found on it felt like swallowing glass. Dozens of messages between Jill and Eddie, a man married to her close friend, Grace. They weren't just flirty, they were brazen. Pictures, innuendos, rendezvous plans, full confessions of lust dressed up as love. Chris sat with the tablet in his lap, hands shaking, bile rising in his throat as he realized this wasn't a fling. It was an affair meticulously coordinated. He took screenshots of everything. Each tap of his finger felt like loading bullets into a gun made of truth. Jill had no idea he knew. She still kissed him on the cheek before work, still played the role of dutiful wife. But Chris wasn't her fool anymore. He was gathering the storm, piece by piece, waiting for the perfect time to strike. Chris didn't confront Jill right away, not because he lacked the courage, but because he wanted the impact to shatter, not just crack. He knew that in order to devastate her lies, he had to weaponize her own secrets. Over weeks, he built a digital dossier that could make a courtroom weep. Screenshots, timestamps, credit card receipts, photos from Google Sync she never realized were still live. But the moment of revelation didn't come with screaming or thrown glasses. It came with calculated silence. Chris waited in their living room, calm, collected, as Jill strolled in from another late meeting. The television screen flickered on, and with one tap, he began his presentation. Her car parked behind the hotel, her smile framed by a man's embrace. Lipstick stains on cheeks that weren't his. Jill froze, keys dangling from her fingers, the color draining from her face. Each image that appeared on screen stripped away the lies she'd carefully crafted like peeling layers from a rotting fruit. Chris said nothing until the very end. Until every digital sin stood tall and unignorable. Then, with deadly calm, he simply asked, "So, how long were you planning to make a fool out of me?" Jill crumbled, trying to explain to bargain. But Chris wasn't playing that game. He had already filed for divorce. Her betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was an erasure of their shared life. Chris didn't need to yell. He had the truth. And sometimes, the truth delivered in silence is the loudest scream of all. Chris had expected betrayal to feel like fire, sharp, blazing, destructive. But when he finally confronted Jill, it was ice that filled his veins. After gathering months of irrefutable evidence, he sat her down on a quiet Sunday morning, the sun filtering through the kitchen blinds like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. On the table between them lay the evidence. Photos, chat transcripts, GPS pings, credit card statements, and the hotel key card she never thought he'd find. Jill, still groggy from sleep and wrapped in his old t-shirt, blinked at the evidence like it couldn't possibly be about her. "Chris," she said, voice trembling, "I can explain." But he raised a hand. He wasn't there for excuses. Not anymore. He watched her crumble in slow motion, the realization dawning in pieces. Her face flushed, then drained. Her eyes flicked from item to item, trying to calculate which part was most damning, where she might start her redemption arc. But Chris wasn't writing a story where she got a second chance. "You planned it," he said quietly. "Eat." rewrote our life with another man while still warming my bed. She opened her mouth, but he continued. You cheated, and not just on me, but on the life we built. Jill's tears came, thick and messy, but Chris felt nothing. His heart had burned out weeks ago, leaving only ash and resolve. He stood, slid the divorce papers across the table, and walked out. Not because he was broken, but because he was finally free. In the aftermath of his confrontation with Jill, Chris didn't fall apart. He sharpened. Every betrayal she had buried under false smiles and soft kisses had etched itself into him like a blade. But rather than bleed, he hardened. He deleted her from his phone, unfollowed her on social media, packed up every photo, card, and trinket from their 12-year marriage, and dropped it at her sister's doorstep without a note. He wasn't interested in drama. He was interested in erasure. Then came the rebuilding. Chris moved into a small but sun-drenched apartment downtown, minimalistic and clean, no floral prints, no lingering perfume, no echoes of Jill's laughter bouncing off the walls. He picked up new habits like boxing a local gym, cooking from scratch, and even learning Italian just because it sounded beautiful and he needed beauty in his life again. Slowly, he felt the weight peel off, but it was when he bumped into Grace, yes, that Grace, Eddie's wife, at a bookstore of all places that the air shifted. She looked worn, thinner, but her eyes were bright with a fire he hadn't seen before. They stood across from each other. Awkward at first, but truth is magnetic. Over coffee, they traded stories like war veterans, stitching wounds with shared grief. And somewhere in that shared sorrow, Chris saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Not revenge, not rebound, but connection. For the first time since his world cracked open, he exhaled fully. There was life after Jill. And maybe, just maybe, something better. The morning Jill moved out for good, Chris didn't cry. He didn't pace or scream or crumble in the doorway like a man broken. He simply stood there, coffee in hand, watching her load her final suitcase into the back of her sister's SUV. She didn't look back. He didn't expect her to. The silence she left behind was heavy, but not haunting. It was clarifying. In that silence, Chris heard the truth. He had loved a version of her that no longer existed, or perhaps never had. He took that clarity and turned it into motion. He filed the final divorce papers, changed the locks, and filled the house with a scent of fresh paint and eucalyptus candles. He replaced the mattress, tore down the photos, and stripped every piece of furniture Jill had once chosen. What remained was his, a raw, clean slate. That same week, he met Everett at a rooftop networking mixer. A tech investor with a keen eye and even sharper instincts. Everett was sharp-tongued, confident, and strangely kind. Their connection sparked fast, born not of flirtation, but mutual understanding. Chris found himself drawn to the way Everett spoke, calculated yet poetic, and the way he listened, not to reply, but to really hear. Soon, dinners became weekends. Weekends became slow mornings tangled in rumpled sheets and whispered laughter. Chris didn't expect to find intimacy again so soon. But with Everett, there was no pretense, no performance. Just quiet discovery. And for the first time, intimacy didn't feel like a risk. It felt like redemption. The day Jill called Chris, her voice trembled like a cracked violin string. She was breathless, broken, and barely coherent. Eddie left me, she said. He said I came with nothing, so I should leave with nothing. Chris listened in silence, unmoved. Months ago, that voice would have shattered him. But now, it was just noise from a distant storm he no longer stood beneath. Jill begged, pleaded, I made a mistake, Chris. Please, let me come home. But there was no home anymore, not for them. He'd already buried that version of his life. He didn't scream. He didn't gloat. He simply said what needed to be said. You burned this bridge with gasoline and pride. Now you want to cross it with tears. She sobbed. She accused. She clawed at guilt like it might save her. But Chris had already walked through fire and found peace on the other side. Later that night, sipping wine on the balcony beside Everett, wrapped in warm laughter and stories of second chances, Chris finally exhaled. Letting go hadn't been a loss. It had been a gift. Sometimes, the cleanest love begins after the dirtiest goodbye. In today's world of instant gratification and hidden screens, trust is more fragile than ever. The story of Chris and Jill reminds us that emotional neglect often begins in silence. Unspoken doubts, hidden texts, shifting priorities. Don't ignore the red flags. Communicate openly. Protect your emotional boundaries and never sacrifice your self-worth for someone else's secrecy. If love becomes a guessing game, step back and reevaluate. You deserve transparency, partnership, and the kind of respect that doesn't require surveillance to verify. And if betrayal finds its way into your life, let it be the catalyst for rediscovery, not destruction. Choose peace over chaos.